Popular YouTuber Dantavius has been missing for 4 weeks at this point, and authorities are saying he's probably dead. The YouTuber was last seen gambling at a casino where he was overheard saying, quote, "Holy shit, that was everything I had." Now, police have done a massive search and rescue operation, and no human remains have been found. Only a nitrous oxide container and a packet of rhino pills. Back to you.
You know, I wouldn't really recommend faking your own death. These days with the cell phones and the internet and the NSA monitoring your every move, your chances of pulling it off are slim to none. That being said, it's not impossible. Now, unfortunately, we can't reach out to people who fake their own deaths and ask them how they did it, but we can do the next best thing and study people who tried and failed to pull it off and learn from their mistakes. And that's exactly what I did. So I've compiled a list of 10 rules that you absolutely need to follow if you're gonna fake your own death. Starting with rule number 1, never get anyone else involved.
Samuel Israel III was born with a silver spoon in his ass. He came from one of the richest and most powerful families in New York, who made billions from importing sugar and chocolate. Sam spent a good deal of his life sitting around leeching off his parents' money, but sometime in the 80s, he decided he needed to get off his ass and make a name for himself. So he pulled himself up by his bootstraps and used his family connections to become a stockbroker on Wall Street. A job that he was not qualified for in the slightest. Despite that, he eventually gained his footing and he was doing well. So well, in fact, that in 1996, he started his own investment firm, which he named Bayou Hedge Fund. His family's name quickly attracted a bunch of wealthy investors. At its peak, the fund had $450 million in it, which is, hold on one second, I gotta think about this, gotta do the mental math. Carry the 3. A lot. Things could not have been going better. Bayou's clients got regular updates that their money was going up. And obviously, Sam Israel was fully embracing the life of a Wall Street degenerate. Fancy cars, coke, hookers, the whole 9 yards. He even rented a mansion from a certain famous Home Alone 2 actor. But is it possible that the Bayou Hedge Fund wasn't what it seemed? In 2003, a former employee sued Bayou Funds, claiming that he had been fired for asking too many questions. He claimed that the company's books weren't adding up and that millions of dollars would just randomly disappear. Sam waved the guy off as a disgruntled employee making shit up, and he had receipts to back up that claim. You see, Bayou's books were audited yearly by a third-party accounting firm called Richmond Fairfield Associates. They confirmed that there was no shenanigans and that the firm had indeed produced massive returns for its investors. Bayou would continue to thrive even after this setback. By 2005, it had stated that the firm generated $300 million in profits. But then, out of nowhere, when things were going so good, Sam unexpectedly announced to his clients that he was leaving the hedge fund to spend time with his family. He assured every investor that they would all get their money shortly, but the money, just like the Filipina girlfriend I met online, was never real. But wait, hold on. What about Richmond Fairfield, the firm that was auditing Bayou? Well, Richmond Fairfield was owned by Samuel Israel III, and as it turns out, the firm wasn't making money at all. It was doing the opposite, losing. The whole thing was just a massive Ponzi scheme, one of the biggest in history up to that point, actually. Now, despite the fact that this man had access to some of the best lawyers that money could buy, Sam was sentenced to a big, fat 22 years in prison, which surprised everybody. Usually these white-collar cucks get off with a slap on the dick. At the time, Sam was pushing 50, and a 22-year prison sentence might as well have been life. So Sam had nothing left to lose. While he was out on bail, Sam hit up some of his connections, former CIA and Mossad guys who had gotten him a new identity. Social security card, ID, birth certificate, everything he needed. Then he purchased an RV for $55,000 and decided he was going to live out of that and travel the country. An idea he came up with after watching the film RV. But all that was the easy part. The hard part was staging his death. On June 9th, 2008, Sam drove up the Bear Mountain Bridge in upstate New York. He parked his car on the side and jumped off the bridge into the construction nets below, which are used to catch rogue pieces of concrete that might fall. Then, he crawled through the net, Mission Impossible style, to the other side of the bridge, where one of his Mossad contacts was waiting to take him to his RV several miles away. Now, the police didn't even bother doing a search and rescue because it was pretty obvious that the dude staged his own death. I mean, the schmuck wrote, "Suicide is painless" on the hood of his car. What the hell did he think the cops were going to be like? Well, I guess he must have whacked himself then, case closed. Now, even though it was obvious that the dude was on the lam, the cops still couldn't find him. Sam could have probably laid low for a while with his fake identity and maybe gotten away with it. But he made one fatal mistake. He got his girl involved. You see, Sammy had told his girlfriend about the whole scheme and that the two of them were going to live happily ever after together in his trailer. Huge mistake, because when the police questioned her, she folded like a lawn chair. The cops now knew that Sam was hiding out somewhere in a huge RV, and he realized the jig was up and turned himself in, gaining another 2 years on top of his sentence in the process. So yeah, very important. Don't get anyone involved that doesn't have to be. If you're going to fake your death, you need to be the only one who knows about it. Rule number 2, and these are in no particular order, by the way, no tattoos. Okay, this may seem like it's not a big deal, but it is. They say not to judge a book by its cover, but in my experience, tattoos are a pretty solid indicator of people's personality. Now, of course, there are some exceptions. I do have a tattoo from my brief stint in federal prison that I'm not very proud of, and I hope people don't judge me because of it. I guess my point is, you gotta be careful with tattoos, especially if you're trying to fake your own death. Take the case of Chandra Mohan Sharma. He successfully escaped his marriage and started a new life, only to be identified by one of his tattoos. Sharma was an Indian political activist from Delhi. When he was approaching 40, bro had some kind of crazy midlife crisis, and he decided that he wanted to leave his wife to go be with his 26-year-old Guma. Now, getting divorced in India is a long and complicated process, apparently. So Sharma decided to opt out for the easier solution and fake his own death. This way, everybody wins. He could go be with his girlfriend, and his wife would still get a little bit of something from the insurance policy, plus she wouldn't have to deal with the social stigma of being divorced. Okay, well, in a weird way, that's pretty thoughtful, actually. Maybe he's not such a bad guy. On May 1st, 2024, Sharma murdered a homeless man, put him in his car, and then set it on fire so that the body would be unrecognizable. Wow, okay. I think I spoke too soon. He's a bad guy. He's a really bad guy. Sharma found a mentally unstable man who used to roam the same area and became friendly with the man. He took the man to his car and strangulated him with a belt. The homeless man was then put in the driver's seat before setting the car on fire. After that ugly business was out of the way, Sharma moved to Bangalore with his new girlfriend so he could... Well, but there was only one problem. The girlfriend never told anyone where she was going, so her parents reported her missing. And it didn't take long before Sharma got sick of her ass too, because he started anonymously calling her family, begging them to come get her. Police were able to trace those calls and eventually track Sharma down to the Honda factory where he worked. Now, by this point, he had changed his appearance, but there's one thing he didn't change. The tattoo of his wife and children's names on his arm. I mean, there's no explaining your way out of that one, dog. But this dude was a freaking super genius compared to the next schlemiel we're going to be talking about.
Police say this man has lived his life under at least 16 different names. They believe he fled from America to the UK to avoid rape charges in Utah. Then, in 2020, they were told he was dead.
Nicholas Rossi is as vile and disgusting as he is silly. It's kind of a weird combination, kind of like a clown who murders people. Damn. I wonder if anyone's ever thought of that before. That would make a good movie. Born Nicholas Alahverdian, Rossi, oh shit, he's Armenian, bro? God damn, that explains a lot. Rossi had a history of behavioral problems basically since he was born. And when you hear about his dad, it'll make sense why. You see, his father was a psychopath with a criminal record longer than my Uncle Ruben's. From forging checks to selling drugs to emulating Nintendo games, this man's degeneracy had no limits. Nick's mom left his dad after he continuously beat her and her children, and she later married this guy Nicholas Rossi, who also had a bit of a temper. That's why Nick ended up in the system.
Nicholas took his stepfather's surname, but the pair's relationship was nothing short of turbulent.
As a child, he was trouble. Hit his mother, hit his grandmothers. He was the devil's spawn.
At age 12, he legally emancipated himself and was put in the care of the Rhode Island Department of Children. Now, Nick was already a disturbed kid, and this only made his mental health worse. He spent the next few years moving from group home to group home on an almost nightly basis, and the other kids would bully him, beat him up, and steal his stuff. That's why after Rossi turned 18, he dedicated his life to trying to reform the Department of Children. He organized rallies, held news conferences, and even filed lawsuits against state officials for abuse and conspiracy.
Alahverdian is suing this long list of former and current state officials and the DCYF for how he was treated while in state care. He alleges he was physically and sexually assaulted while he was moved in and out of some 20 group homes in 3 states.
Take your worst nightmare, multiply it by 5,000.
For a while, it was looking like Nicky might have a promising political career in the future. But then, he went and fucked it all up. In 2008, Nick enrolled in college in Ohio, and bro couldn't even finish a semester without sexually assaulting someone. Not to get too graphic, but Nick was accused by a female student of groping and exposing himself to her. And that's putting it lightly. The woman decided to press charges, and Nick, being the ridiculous man that he is, showed up to court with a cane and a fake limp and claimed that the accusations were made to cover up the woman cheating on her boyfriend. And to his credit, he had some pretty solid evidence to back up this claim. The woman had made a post on MySpace around the time of the alleged sexual assault. "I can't forgive you for what you've done. I loved you so much, and you'll never have any idea. But I went too far by lying and getting some stranger to go to jail so you wouldn't think I would cheat on you, even when I did slip because he was cute." If it wasn't already obvious that this was complete horseshit, the court called in a forensics expert who confirmed that it was complete horseshit. He said there was 90% certainty that the blog post had been completely fabricated. Unsurprisingly, Nick was found guilty and was required to register as a sex offender, which pretty much destroyed his chances of having a political career. Following his court loss, Nick wrote an essay titled "My Personal 9/11," where he compared his legal troubles to 9/11, which was a national tragedy, by the way. By the time this was written, Nick had sexually assaulted at least 4 other women across the United States. And if that wasn't bad enough, he was also a con man. Nick had scammed people out of hundreds of thousands of dollars and was being investigated by the FBI for identity theft and fraud.
Investigations have also been carried out into various counts of fraud. This man began working for a Canadian woman who's expanding her business across the pond.
I lost a lot of money, not just the 40 grand, but, hundreds of thousands because I had to do damage control.
Somehow, he was able to avoid going to jail, but it seemed like the walls were closing in on him. On top of the fraud case, he was also wanted for a rape that was committed in Utah all the way back in 2011. So basically, bro was cooked. But then, things got even worse for him when he died. On February 29th, 2020, Alahverdian's obituary was posted online. And I'm just gonna read an excerpt from it because it's so ridiculous. Mr. Alahverdian died 2 months after going public with his diagnosis of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. At the bedside were Mrs. Alahverdian, their 2 children, and extended family. His last words were, "Fear not and run towards the bliss of the Son." What an asshole. It went on to say that he was cremated and his ashes were spread at sea. And a few years would pass with no trace of Nick, and it was looking like the guy might have actually died. Okay, so let's jump ahead to 2022, Glasgow, Scotland. A bloke by the name of Arthur Knight caught a really bad case of this fake disease that was going around back then, and he ended up going into a coma. Now, in a stroke of dumb luck, Arthur's nurse happened to see an Interpol red notice for one Nicholas Rossi, and she noticed that he had the exact same tattoos as her patient.
And then there are the tattoos, which nurses at a Scotland hospital reportedly used to identify Knight as Alahverdian, who was previously photographed with body art on both arms.
What are the odds of that? So 2 police officers showed up and arrested him on suspicion that he was Nicholas Rossi, and their suspicions were correct. Spoiler alert. In his defense, Knight said, quote, "Throughout the 18 days I was comatose, I did not have free will over my body. I have never had tattoos prior to being in the hospital." So this schmuck claimed that somebody came into the hospital while he was in a coma and spent hours tattooing his arms to make him look like a fugitive rapist from the United States for no reason. Arthur Knight was so adamant that he was innocent that he decided to do an interview with Dateline NBC to clear his name.
What do you say to someone who believes that you are Nicholas Alahverdian?
I am not Andrea. I am not Nicholas Alahverdian, and I do not know how to make this clear. I can't walk. People say that's an act. Let me try to stand up. Let me try to stand up. Exactly.
Bro, this guy is so silly. I keep forgetting he's a psychopathic sex predator. Knight was extradited to the United States to stand trial for his crimes, but he continued to deny that he was Nicholas Alahverdian. That is until 2024, when he completely dropped the accent and claimed that he went on the run because he was getting death threats from officials in Rhode Island due to his activism. He claimed that all these accusations against him were some kind of grand conspiracy because he spoke out against the Rhode Island foster care system.
For years, he's claimed he's an Irish orphan framed by authorities named Arthur Knight. However, today, under oath, Rossi admitted to using a number of aliases, including Arthur Knight, but claimed the reason behind the name changes was because there was a number of threats made against him. These threats, Rossi say, stem from his previous work in child services. However, when asked who made the threats, he refused to answer, claiming the assailants could still go after him.
Amazing stuff, man. Absolutely incredible.
You know, researching this topic has been kind of a pain in the ass, because a lot of articles will omit details and other ones are overly biased. And that's why I think ground news is so important. And oh, would you look at that? They just happen to be the sponsor of this video. Ground news helps me sort through all the bullshit that often comes with reading a lot of articles. They have a bunch of tools that help you better understand the context of the news you're reading, like the factuality rating that shows you how accurate reporting is, or the bias comparison tool, which shows you which side of the political spectrum an article is coming from. I often run into this problem when doing research, that a lot of stories have their narratives shaped to fit certain biases. I'll give you an example. I was reading about this Harvard researcher who got arrested for smuggling frog embryos. Now, on the surface, a story like this doesn't seem to have any kind of political agenda or anything, but then I see that most of the articles are coming from left-leaning sources, which kind of makes a man think. Why? Well, after a deeper dive, I realized that she got detained by ICE and might get deported back to Russia, where she says her life is in danger, all because of some lousy frogs. So that kind of makes sense. The more left sources are using this story to criticize ICE, while the more right sources kind of downplay that aspect of it. I highly recommend Ground News to anyone who wants to be well informed. And only right now, they're offering 40% off their Vantage plan, which I've been using to do research on some other topics. Just go to ground.news/DTVS. Again, that's ground.news/DTVS, or use this QR code and see the truth. Yeah, thank you, Ground News. I love you.
Now, I think this goes without saying, but if you're gonna get away with faking your own death, you need to stay out of trouble. On October 6, 1988, the Columbian Hotel in Wenatchee, Washington, burned to the ground. It didn't take long for the fire department to figure out that the fire was no accident. The prime suspect was the building's owner, Ricky Wetta. Now, the case against him was pretty strong, but Wetta only made things worse for himself when he shot his best friend in the head. On September 5th, 1989, Wetta invited his friend Emmett Thompson to go shooting. But Thompson had no idea that the target was him. The two of them were walking back to Ricky's car when all of a sudden, Thompson heard 3 pops and realized that he had been shot in the head, and he somehow survived. How the heck do you survive getting shot in the head 3 times, bro? This guy think he's Vince Foster or something? Now, Thompson surviving was the worst thing that could have happened to Ricky Wetta because he went to the police and spilled everything. Thompson told them that it was him who lit the fire, and Ricky had taken out a $3 million insurance policy on the hotel and promised to split the profits with him if Thompson burned the place down. But the story gets so much more insane because, you see, after getting booked in prison, police figured out that this man wasn't Ricky Wetta at all. His real name was Jerry Balasag, and he was supposed to have died a decade prior. So let's back up a little bit. Jerry Balasag was a professional wrestler who went by the stage name Mr. X. Unfortunately for Jerry, his wrestling career would be short-lived due to blowing his kneecap out. So in 1974, he used some of the money he saved up to open up a motorcycle shop in Alabama. But this career also wouldn't last long because he would soon be indicted on 13 counts of check forgery in connection with his business. Now, the punishment for this crime is not that bad in the grand scheme of things. My uncle Rueben got caught forging checks a bunch of times, and he only went to prison for like 2 months, 3 maybe. Despite that, Balasag took his family and went on the run. First to Miami, then the Bahamas, before finally settling down in Washington state. The FBI was on his ass the whole time, but somehow he managed to evade them. By the time they got to Washington, Balasag had stolen the identity of some poor schmuck named Ricky Wetta, and he used it to somehow get a job at Boeing, but after a few weeks, his boss figured out that he lied on his resume. The schmuck apparently said he went to Cambridge University in England. Bro, if you're gonna lie on your resume, at least make it somewhat believable, okay? What's wrong with DeVry? So this man's life was completely in shambles. Not having a job was bad enough, but he knew that it was only a matter of time before the FBI found him. But then, in the most psychotic twist of fate, this happened.
The nightmare at Jonestown left more than 900 members of the People's Temple dead. Americans who had followed the Reverend Jim Jones into the Guyanese jungle in search of a better life.
The Jonestown Massacre was one of the worst tragedies in American history. But for Jerry Balasag, it was the best thing that could have happened to him. You see, for some reason, his mother was convinced that Jerry and his wife and stepson were among the dead. She even identified them in a photo. She was quoted as saying, "There is no doubt in my mind about that figure being the body of my son." Now, at first the FBI wasn't convinced. They just thought she was an insane old woman. But after Balasag didn't turn up for the next few years, they started thinking, damn, maybe she was right. So Jerry Balasag was declared dead and all his forgery charges were dropped. Jerry was pretty much in the clear. The feds thought he was dead and everyone else thought he was Ricky Wetta. But then the guy had to go and be stupid. After a decade of living life under the radar, I guess our boy Jerry started getting a little restless and he needed a big cash injection quick. So in June of 1988, he bought the Colombian Hotel, which was an abandoned failed business that only cost him a few grand. Over the next few months, he would take out a multi-million-dollar insurance policy on the building and convinced his friend to burn it down, and well, you know the rest. So yeah, don't commit crimes if you fake your own death. In fact, you gotta lie low. You gotta stay under the radar as much as humanly possible. Which brings me to rule number 4. Keep a low profile. I don't know who needs to hear this, but if you're gonna fake your own death, try not to write a New York Times best-selling book when you're supposed to be dead. Because this guy, Philip Sessarego, fumbled the perfect fake death because he was too hungry for attention. Since he was a kid, Philip's dream was to join the British SAS. But When he was finally old enough to join, he was rejected multiple times. Instead, he joined the British Royal Artillery, but that only lasted about 2 years. Afterwards, he became a mercenary and got involved in a bunch of sketchy military operations. Like in 1988, he participated in a coup attempt in the Maldives. Then, in the early 90s, he somehow ended up in the Balkans, where he recruited other mercenaries to join some super secret spec ops mission in Croatia that was supposed to have a huge payout. The only problem is, once they got there, they were just sitting around on their asses waiting for orders. After about 6 weeks, they finally realized why. The British media reported that Phil had gone missing somewhere in Bosnia and was presumed dead. Now, it's unknown if Phil planned all of this or it just kind of happened. Either way, he took advantage of the situation and took on a whole new identity, Tom Carew. Now, as Tom, he wrote a whole-ass book called Jihad! The Secret War in Afghanistan. In it, he claimed to be a member of the SAS who helped the Afghani Mujahideen fight off the Soviets in the late 70s. It was basically a pathetic way to LARP as the person he always imagined himself as. Seems kinda gay, I don't know. The book was released in 2001, and Tom received a £100,000 advance for it. But it wasn't very successful, at least not at first. But that would all change on September 11th of that year. Now, I don't know if you guys are students of history or not, but on that date, a national tragedy occurred in the United States. The mastermind of the 9/11, Osama bin Laden, was part of the Mujahideen, so this created a newfound interest in the topic, and Phil's book was suddenly flying off the shelves like baby oil on the night of a Diddy party. It sold 50,000 copies within a month, and Tom Carew started doing interviews everywhere as a so-called expert on the Mujahideen.
Sort out the opium on the side, which is taking care of all the black money, which rolls over and funds a lot of these terrorist organizations and also the Taliban.
The fakery didn't go on for too long. In November of that year, he was invited on BBC to do an interview. But what he didn't know is that it was actually an expose where the reporter used testimonies from actual SAS members to call him out. The report proved without a doubt that Tom was the once thought dead Philip Sessarego. Phil was cooked after this. He changed his name to Philip Stevenson and disappeared again. 8 years later, his body was found by his landlord in a garage. Sessarego had been dead for several days by that point due to carbon monoxide poisoning, and investigators were unsure if it was accidental or on purpose. Damn, that was pretty dark. Let's move on to a more whimsical person.
Ferdinand DeMara, who is better known as the Great Imposter. During his career, he has actually impersonated 30 different people.
Ferdinand Waldo DeMara. If there was ever a man on this planet who couldn't keep a low profile, it was this guy. I mean, come on. He looks like Peter Griffin from The Family Guy. He sticks out like a sore thumb. Born in 1921, Ferdinand Waldo DeMara grew up in a very religious Catholic household in Rhode Island. Wait, is this guy actually Peter Griffin? Is Peter Griffin like based off this guy or something? Unlike Peter Griffin, Ferdinand decided to dedicate his life to God and became a monk at 16 years old. Kind of like that episode of No, I'm not doing this. After a few years at the monastery, he started to have some disagreements with the clergy. So DeMara decided that he wasn't cut out to be a monk. So he stole a car and drove down to Boston to enlist in the military. Keep in mind, this was in December 1941, so Pearl Harbor had just happened. Military life didn't really suit Ferdinand either. He realized what a huge mistake he made leaving the monastery. So what did our boy Waldo do? He stole the identity of one of his army buddies and went AWOL. And then he made his way to Kentucky and joined another monastery. This time around, he actually enjoyed it, but unfortunately, his second stint as a monk wouldn't last long either, because he was forced to leave after someone recognized him by his real identity. So Ferdinand went back home to lay low for a little bit, and his father tried to convince him to turn himself into military police. After careful consideration, Waldo said, "Fuck that," and joined the Navy. Bro, how is this possible? Now, this shouldn't surprise you by this point, but he didn't last too long in the Navy either. DeMara was getting frustrated because he wasn't getting any promotions, so he wrote a suicide note and went AWOL a second time. Now, this time, he created a brand new persona for himself, Dr. Robert Lipton French, a psychologist. Dr. French bounced around the country, never staying in one place for too long. Eventually, he ended up at St. Martin's Abbey in Washington, where he established his own student psychological center. Now, keep in mind, this mother sucker never studied psychology. Despite that, he was apparently a really good teacher. I mean, this man was just that good at bullshitting. Now, everything was going great at St. Martin's, but the gravy train would come to an end when Ferdinand's past caught up with him. It turns out that while he was running his clinic, the FBI was playing a little game of Where's Waldo, and eventually they found him. The feds figured out his true identity and put him on trial for desertion during wartime, which at the time could get you the death penalty. But Ferdinand, being the S-tier bullshitter he was, managed to get off with an 18-month sentence. Bro, I gotta say, I am extremely jealous. I'm the complete opposite of this dude. I could talk my way into the death penalty for fucking shoplifting. After his release, Ferdinand went right back to his old shenanigans, and he joined another Catholic monastery. While there, he met a real doctor named Dr. Joseph Cyr. Cyr helped treat some of the brothers at the order, and this had a profound impact on Ferdinand. So much so that he decided to steal Dr. Cyr's identity and use it to become a surgeon on a Canadian military vessel. During the Korean War, Ferdinand's vessel was stationed right off the coast. One day, 16 wounded soldiers were brought to the infirmary and needed immediate surgery. Now, keep in mind, Ferdinand had never performed surgery in his life. The only thing he knew was from random medical books he had read. Despite that, he was able to save the lives of all 16 men that he operated on. Bro, this could literally be a Family Guy sketch. Hey Lois, remember when I pretended to be a surgeon during the Korean War? Now guys, I am well aware that all this stuff sounds completely ridiculous and made up, but it made headline news at the time. Apart from dealing with the regular routine of trivial ailments, he was also called upon to undertake much more serious tasks. He performed many operations, including removing a bullet dangerously near the heart, a number of amputations, collapsing a lung, and treating severe head injuries.
How did you set yourself up as a surgeon on a warship?
Actually, I acquired these credentials, obtained a commission, and was sent to Korea as such.
How long did you last as a Navy doctor?
About a year.
Did you operate on anybody?
Oh yes, Korean nationals, a great number of operations.
Our boy Waldo was loving the attention, but it would also be his undoing, because the news of his exploits made their way to the real Dr. Cyr, and he wasn't too happy that his identity had been stolen. So he called the Navy and told them the situation.
Because of this declaration I received, the press officer on board the ship sent dispatches back to Canada, and it appeared in the Canadian press. And the doctor whom I was impersonating suddenly came to life and said, well, I'm here, not in Korea. And the Royal Canadian Mounted Policeman that investigated the thing told me afterwards, quite confidentially, that he was about ready to throw the real doctor in the bucket.
Now, this put the Canadian Navy in a bit of a weird position, because yeah, the guy lied, but he did save several men at the end of the day. So instead of court-martialing him, they decided to quietly sack him. And Waldo went back stateside.
Were you in jail in Canada?
No.
Once he was back in America, Ferdinand sold his story to Life magazine, which ended up being a really bad idea, because now everybody recognized him, so he couldn't pretend to be other people, which was his favorite pastime. The whole grift came to an abrupt end. But at the end of the day, this man was a legend, one of the greatest bullshitters in history. But the next guy we're going to talk about was pretty good too. On November 7th, 1974, Veronica Bingham was attacked at her home in London and badly beaten. Luckily, she was able to get away from her attacker. Unfortunately, her nanny, Sandra Rivet, wasn't so lucky and lost her life. Veronica claimed that the attacker was her estranged husband, Richard Bingham, the 7th Earl of Lucan, and Lord Lucan was nowhere to be found. The police looked everywhere. It was like he disappeared off the face of the earth. 2 weeks later, a posh British man appeared in Melbourne, Australia out of the blue and started opening up bank accounts, transferring large sums of money from overseas. British authorities had found their man. So the man was arrested and questioned, but This guy was no lord. In fact, the police arrested a completely different British criminal, a guy by the name of John Stonehouse, who just 2 months prior was thought to have committed suicide. I mean, what are the odds, bro? I don't know. Anyways, let's talk about this John Stonehouse guy. John Stonehouse basically dedicated his entire life to politics. He joined Britain's Labour Party at just 16 years old. Pretty impressive. At 16, I was gooning, playing WoW, and selling fake insurance policies with my uncle Rueben. Now, John's early political career got off to a bit of a rocky start. He ran twice for public office and lost both times. Despite those setbacks, Stonehouse continued to stay active in politics. He spent most of the 50s championing left-wing policies and speaking out against English colonialism. But his career would really take off in 1959 when he visited the African country of Rhodesia. Now, you might be familiar with Rhodesia because racist losers on the internet are sort of obsessed with it. Today, it's called Zimbabwe, but prior to 1980, it was a colonial apartheid state ran by British people. Kind of like South Africa, but gayer. So John came to Rhodesia to encourage the local black population to stand up for their rights and fight against apartheid. And he wasn't very popular amongst the British people there. The Rhodesian government expelled and banned him from the country, which only made him more popular with the liberals back home. At 32, John became the youngest member of the UK Parliament in history, and his career continued to soar until the late 60s, where he would get into a little bit of hot water. A former spy from Czechoslovakia claimed that Stonehouse was compromised by communists, and apparently this spy fella was John's handler and had paid him over $100,000 in exchange for British state secrets, including government plans, policies, and even aircraft blueprints. Now, British intelligence took these accusations very seriously, and Stonehouse was interrogated for multiple days. But our boy John held his own. MI5 couldn't find any evidence that John was compromised. Either way, it didn't really matter because John's political career was basically destroyed by this scandal. The Labour Party leadership relegated him to some schmuck position, so while he was still a member of Parliament, he lost most of his power along with his salary. So John was out on his ass. No job, no money, and worst of all, he still lived in England. Luckily, he remembered that he had a degree in economics from a pretty prestigious university. I mean, it was no DeVry, but still pretty good nonetheless. He decided to put his degree to work and become a businessman. But he was a lot better at politicianing than he was at businessing, and every single one of his ventures went straight into the toilet. After several of his companies failed, John was left with a disgusting $10 million in debt. What a loser, bro. You could have just gone to the casino and made double that, like I will one day. Any day now. You know, just gotta figure out how to stop losing first. Anyways, John had a lot of shame and a regret on account of all his failures and whatnot, so he fell into a deep depression. So he decided that he had two options. One, take his own life. Two, fake his own death. Obviously, he chose option two, or else he wouldn't be in this video. So in 1974, John started plotting and scheming on how to disappear so he could start a new life with his mistress. Oh, I forgot to mention, in true 70s fashion, he was banging his secretary. In 1974, John had stolen the identity of a deceased man named Clive Muldoon, and in November of that year, he was finally ready to put his plan into action. Stonehouse told his family he was going to Miami on a business trip. The day after he landed, he went for a swim on the beach, where he left a pile of clothes behind and disappeared. Everyone back home, including his wife, assumed he whacked himself because he was depressed. A ceremony was even held in the British Parliament in his honor. Meanwhile, John used his Clive Muldoon identity to fly to Australia, where he met up with his Guma. He did it! The bastard did it! He got away with it! But unfortunately, John didn't cover his tracks well enough. 2 weeks before his disappearance, a member of the British royal family murdered his nanny and attempted to whack his wife. On the surface, this was good news for John because it was a huge story in the British press, so people would be less focused on him. But as we know, it would be his undoing.
If you have a rather charming Englishman living next door to you who looks like that, go straight along to your local police, ask them to contact Scotland Yard through Interpol. We'll do the rest.
This fancy pants rich Englishman materializing out of nowhere right after the disappearance of a murderer set off more than a few alarm bells. When Melbourne police were tipped off that this guy might be Lord Lucan, they raided his house and quickly realized that he wasn't Lord Lucan and that he was John Stonehouse, so they shipped his ass back to England where he, and this is true, joined the Parliament again. He remained in Parliament for 2 more years before eventually resigning, after which he was finally prosecuted for his crimes and eventually found guilty on 18 counts of fraud, for which he only served 3 years in prison. After that, he rejoined politics and started doing a bunch of radio and TV appearances about his disappearance. Say what you will, but these last few guys, they had decent enough plans. I mean, they did get away with it. So that brings me to my next rule. Have a good plan. I know this is pretty obvious, but I cannot stress it enough. If you're gonna fake it, you have to have a meticulous and well thought out plan. Unlike this mother sucker, Ryan Borgwardt. What kind of name is that, asshole? You see, Ryan was going through a pretty bad midlife crisis. When you're a male going through a midlife crisis, you basically have 3 paths. Path number 1, find God. Path number 2, get a hair transplant in Turkey and start taking TRT so you can hit on young women with father issues to distract you from the fact that you're inching closer and closer to the grave. Or fake your own death. Ryan went with option number 3. His story begins like many sad tales with a woman from Uzbekistan. Ryan started chatting up this woman on some Uzbek dating site and fell for her hard. So hard that he made the decision to abandon his wife and children to be with her in Uzbekistan. So with the help of his guma, Ryan came up with a plan. A plan so stupid that it just might work. Well, obviously it didn't, but just keep watching. In January 2024, it was time to put this plan into motion. The first step was to take out a $375,000 life insurance policy. After a few months, he reported his passport stolen and got a replacement. Then, he started moving all his money into a foreign bank account. And finally, he deleted his browsing history and wiped his hard drive. Now guys, I don't think I need to explain why doing all these things right before attempting to fake your own death is incredibly dumb, so I won't. Once the groundwork was laid, Ryan was ready to carry out the final step. On August 11th, he took his kayak out to Green Lake. When he was far enough away from prying eyes, he threw his phone in the lake and capsized his boat and swam back to shore. After Ryan hadn't come home that night, his wife filed a missing persons report and the police started searching the lake for him. It didn't take long for them to find his overturned kayak along with his unused life vest. Now, cops were pretty convinced that he had accidentally drowned in the lake, so the police launched a massive search mission to recover his body. And when I say massive, I mean it. They brought out all the brakes. The search lasted 54 days, and the Wisconsin government paid almost $40,000 trying to find his body. Meanwhile, this schmuck was across the globe doing backshots on some Central Asian broad. Now, Ryan never anticipated that the police would go so hard in trying to find him. And while the search and rescue team were doing their thing out there in the water, the investigators back at the office started noticing some weird stuff. After detectives searched Ryan's laptop, they noticed that he had completely wiped everything clean, which was weird. But hey, it's entirely possible that he was just into some weird fetish stuff involving midgets and octopuses and wiped it clean every night so his wife wouldn't catch him. I know some guys who do that. Not me. On October 7th, the investigators got a major break in the case. Someone called in a tip and said that Ryan had been checked by Canadian Border Patrol a day after he was reported missing. After some more digging, investigators found that Ryan had transferred his funds overseas. But the final nail in the coffin came when they uncovered Ryan's secret email account, which he used to communicate with his Uzbek guma. So, the jig was up. Everyone knew that Ryan was alive. On November 8th, 2024, Green Lake County Sheriff's Department issued a press conference saying they knew Ryan was somewhere in Europe and pleaded for him to come home. At this point, Ryan was in Georgia, the country, not the state. He saw the press conference and he knew he was totally and completely screwed. Not too long after this, police were able to get in contact with Ryan, and he sent a video of himself proving that he was in fact alive and well.
Good evening, it's Ryan Borgwardt. I'm in my apartment. I am safe, secure, no problem. Hope this works.
But Ryan was still apprehensive. He didn't want to come back and face the music. It was embarrassing, honestly. So investigators appealed to his sense of fatherhood, saying stuff like, "Christmas is coming, and what better gift could you get your kids than to be there for Christmas?" It took several days, but eventually Ryan caved and decided to go back home. As soon as he landed, he was arrested on charges of obstruction, which carries with it a sentence of 9 months in prison and a $10,000 fine, which honestly seems kind of like not that bad. All I know is that all of this could have worked out for him if he just spent more time thinking about his plan. But hey, it could have been worse. Just like the next guy we're going to talk about, Marcus Schrenker. Okay, honestly, I think a lot of these could go in the category of don't get into astronomical amounts of debt. Because here we have another case of a guy who was so in over his head that he felt he had no way out but to fake his death. Marcus Schrenker was a man who had it all. He was married to his college sweetheart, and they had 3 beautiful children together. He was also a successful businessman who lived a lavish life, complete with a McMansion, 2 airplanes, and the complete Family Guy Blu-ray box set, with deleted scenes and commentary. But it was all a facade. You see, a couple of sentences ago when I said Marcus was a successful businessman, I was lying, and I apologize. He had filed for bankruptcy on 2 separate occasions and resorted to scamming people so he could support his lifestyle. See, Marcus owned 2 investment firms and an insurance company. His clients gave him money hoping for a good return, but in reality, Marcus would just pocket the money and claim it was lost in bad investments, and charge them a bunch of transaction fees on top of that. He even convinced one guy to invest in a foreign currency that didn't exist. Jeez, man, this dude was really ahead of his time. Could you imagine if crypto was around back then? Now, he was able to keep up this schmuckery for years, but inevitably, the house of cards would start to collapse. By 2008, Marcus was facing multiple lawsuits, including one for $1.4 million. And if that wasn't bad enough, the Indiana Department of Insurance filed a complaint against him, claiming he had scammed investors out of $250K, and things would only continue to spiral out of control from there. Within the span of a month, Marcus's father had died, his wife had filed for divorce, and the police raided his house. That's a lot for a guy to deal with all at once. So Marcus was heavily considering paying a visit to the rope store, followed by another visit to the old rickety stool store. But then he thought of a better idea. On January 11, 2009, Marcus Schrenker took off in his airplane and started flying towards Florida. As he was approaching Huntsville, Alabama, Marcus issued a distress call saying his plane was experiencing severe turbulence and that his windshield had blown out, causing him to bleed profusely. Now, I should probably mention that if you switch the month and year around on the date, it comes out to 9/11. Coincidence? Probably. Still kind of weird though. Anyways, after making the distress call, Marcus jumped out of his plane. Luckily, he remembered his parachute and safely landed on the ground somewhere in Alabama. Unluckily, he was now in Alabama. Meanwhile, his plane had crashed about 200 miles away in a swamp in northern Florida. The plane very narrowly avoided hitting someone's house, by the way, so this guy's a complete asshole. It was pretty obvious that Marcus put a lot of effort and time into this whole scheme, but that doesn't mean it was a good plan. I mean, it is complete dog shit. After landing, Marcus walked to the closest house he could find and told the homeowner that he had been in a canoe accident. The owner called the police, who offered to drive Marcus to the nearest motel. Keep in mind that by this point, they had no idea about the plane crash, so they dropped him off and went about their business. The next day, officers caught wind of the whole situation and realized that Marcus was probably the pilot of the crashed plane. So they went back to the motel to question him, but by that point, he was long gone. He snuck out of the back window in the middle of the night and made his way to a storage unit where he stashed a motorcycle. And then he went on the run. Back at the crash site, investigators discovered a book with a list of campsites, and the pages for Alabama and Florida had been ripped out. There could not have been a more obvious clue. Now, the FBI was involved, and once they knew Schrenker was hiding out in a campground somewhere near Alabama, it didn't take long to track him down. When the feds finally tracked him down, Marcus was lying in a tent in a pool of his own blood with both his wrists slashed. According to one of the agents, he had deep cuts on his wrists. He was incoherent and bleeding so profusely that he probably would not have survived another hour. Fortunately, the officers were able to save his life, but unfortunately, he was sentenced to 10 years in prison and basically had to have all his assets liquidated to pay back all the people he scammed. This man thought he was going to be D.B. Cooper, but he was more like D.B. Pooper. Yeah. So let's move on. Once you're past the planning phase and you're into the new life phase, you gotta make sure to keep your story straight, or else people will start to get suspicious and it'll screw everything up. Rule number 6. Keep your story straight. Kim Avis was born Vince Avis in Suffolk, England. In his younger years, Kim was a typical British street punk with a penchant for drugs and crime. After getting in trouble with the law multiple times, Kim decided to give up his old life and reinvent himself. So, at some point in the early 90s, he changed his name from Vince to Kim to honor his favorite president. Sometime in the 90s, he showed up to the city of Inverness, Scotland on horseback and became a street vendor, peddling shitty jewelry out of a stall. During his time there, he developed a strong Scottish accent despite not being Scottish. Okay, so on paper, this guy sounds like a complete asshole, but he was actually pretty popular and even became kind of a local celebrity due to his fundraising efforts. His most famous one was this event where he would swim across Loch Ness to raise money for charity. So naturally, the guy attracted a lot of attention from the local ladies. One girl in particular really fell for Kim hard. Jade Skea was 18 years old when she met Kim Avis, who was in his 40s. The two of them started dating, and at first everything was going pretty well, but as time went on, Kim started getting more and more possessive of Jade. He isolated her from her friends and family and would often abuse her. After almost a decade of putting up with his abuse, Jade decided she couldn't take it anymore and went to the police. Kim was absolutely shocked that Jade would betray him, and he was even more shocked when another woman filed a report against him, followed by 2 more women. As they say in England, he was plumb fucked. Do they say that in England? I don't know. I don't really like knowing anything about that place. Kim was arrested and charged in court, and while he was out on bail, he realized there was no way for him to avoid prison time, so he decided to improvise. First, he sold his house, which he called the Wolf's Den, and used the money to buy himself a plane ticket to the United States, specifically Monastery Beach in California. Now, there was a reason he chose this beach, in particular out of California's 840 miles of coastline. Monastery Beach had a bit of a reputation on account of a lot of people drowning there, which earned it the nickname Mortuary Beach. Now, I think you guys know where this is going. 3 days later, Kim was reported missing. After a couple days of searching, the police got word about Kim's legal trouble back home, and the search and rescue mission turned into a manhunt. And Kim turned out to be way more slippery than the police ever anticipated. Months would go by with no leads. Meanwhile, about 1,200 miles away in Colorado Springs, a man named Cameron McGregor showed up to town out of the blue. He opened up a stall on the side of the road and started selling rocks and gemstones. Cameron immediately attracted attention to himself on account of his flamboyant personality and thick Scottish accent. Now, this is gonna blow your mind, but Cameron McGregor was none other than Kim Avis. I know, you weren't expecting that. So Kim had basically settled into his new life as a Colorado Springian, and he even had his own business, a solid group of friends, and best of all, the police had no idea. But things would inevitably unravel because the schmuck couldn't get his story straight. See, he had told everyone in town that he was born and raised in Montana, despite sounding like Shrek, The inconsistencies of his life story made some of his new friends suspicious. One of them decided to do a background check on him to see if he really was who he said he was. And that was pretty much all she wrote for Kim Avis. Not long after, U.S. Marshals swarmed the hotel Avis was staying at and arrested him. He was briefly held in the U.S. before getting extradited back to Scotland, where he would be sentenced to 15 years in prison, which he could have avoided if he just kept his story straight. Our next villain had the same problem. Her death hoax had more holes in it than my last marriage. In 1999, Kaycee Nicole, a high school student from Minnesota, made herself a website. On the surface, there wasn't much to it, a couple of photos of her plus a few lines of text. But one sentence in particular stands out. If I had a chance to say only one thing, I'd say, make it count. You only get one shot at it. At first glance, this seems like a generic motivational bullshit, but the truth is, beneath the smile, Kaycee had been struggling with leukemia for years, and her prognosis didn't look good. Kaycee wanted to spread as much joy and happiness as she could while she was still on Earth. Because of her illness, Kaycee was often stuck at home and spent a lot of time chatting with people on the internet. And one of these people was a guy named Randall. Now, 9 times out of 10, dudes named Randall are complete scumbags. Randall, if you're watching this, fuck you. So this specific Randall was the exception to the rule. After Kaycee told him her life story, it hit him right in the feels, and he decided that it was a story that needed to be told. He pretty much dedicated his life to getting Kaycee's story out. He even made her a new website, which he managed and paid for. And before long, it started gaining a lot of traction. Kaycee became an internet celebrity. Thousands of people were reaching out to her every day, sending her thoughts, prayers, and gifts. Mostly through email, but some even talked to her on the phone, and she would receive gifts and donations through the mail. Sadly, all the well wishes in the world couldn't stop the inevitable. On May 14th, 2001, it was announced that Kaycee had died due to complications from her leukemia. Kaycee's mother, Debbie Swanson, came out and thanked everyone for the love they shared for her daughter. Her fans were absolutely devastated by her passing. Except there's one thing. Kaycee never had leukemia. But that's not the twist. The twist is that Kaycee Nicole never existed. Let's take a step back. You guys remember Kaycee's mom, Debbie, from like 4 sentences ago? Well, for some reason, she decided to cook up this Kaycee Nicole character sometime in 1999. She used photos of one of her friend's daughters and took stories of real cancer victims to make the story convincing. And the broad almost got away with it too, but things would start to unravel after Kaycee's supposed death. Some people online started pointing out inconsistencies in Kaycee's story and noticed that a lot of things weren't adding up. First of all, there was no obituary or funeral service posted anywhere. And some people who talked to Kaycee on the phone noticed that she sounded an awful lot like Debbie. At first, these were just rumors, but it wouldn't be long before people figured out the real identity of the girl in the photos. So Debbie was forced to come clean about all this tomfoolery. She claimed that she never meant to hurt anyone, and the lie just kind of snowballed out of control. Also, she felt horrible every time people gave her gifts. Yeah, I'm sure she did. Debbie's behavior was so weird that it's actually classified as a disorder, digital fictitious disorder, or Munchausen's by internet. And sadly, a similar disease has been on the rise in recent years, a disease which I've dubbed anything for views syndrome, or AFVS. Which brings me to my next rule. The views aren't worth it. Now, I don't think I'm telling tales out of school here, but a lot of YouTubers are degenerates. Just a bunch of narcissistic, immature sociopaths starved for attention and money. But enough about me. I would never stoop so low as to fake my own death for views. Unlike this Belgian TikToker who showed up to his own funeral in a frickin' helicopter.
A Belgian man has faked his own death to see who would attend his funeral in a TikTok stunt. That's pretty cruel, if you ask me.
Many such cases. But right now, I want to talk about Neon.
Are you a virgin?
Yes.
Have you ever said the hard R?
Yes.
Have you ever watched gay porn?
Yes.
So I'm in my late 40s now, and I had no idea who this guy was until like this week. and I think my life is probably 5% worse after discovering him. Neon, spelled with a 3, is a 20-year-old kick streamer. He's also Indian and I think gay, not that any of that matters. But around 4 years ago, or 5 years ago, Neon was in high school streaming video games on YouTube and built up a nice little audience of 200k subscribers for himself. But it wasn't enough. He wanted that sweet, sweet dopamine rush that you can only get from millions of views. Or nitrous oxide. Fuck, I miss nitrous oxide. So Enthreon decided to do the unthinkable. In 2019, Neon released a series of videos. The first one being, Neon is dying. And what the fuck is this thumbnail, bro? This is the worst Photoshop I've ever seen. That's actually awesome. He would then release another video where Enthreon's little brother claimed that he passed away from a brain tumor. Condolences poured in, as did the views. Neon got exactly what he wanted. But the proverbial chickens had to come home to roost eventually.
I was in a Rockets game, and then there was a cutscene where they're like showing a replay of Carmelo Anthony hitting a jump shot, and I was in the back of the cutscene, and then he posted on Twitter, and they're like, oh, he's not dead.
After getting exposed, Neon would make one last video claiming that a miracle surgery cured him of his brain tumor and that he was going to live. Now, in a just world, all of these influencers who fake their own deaths would be in prison for life. But faking your own death is actually not a crime in and of itself. Most of the people who do it have committed other crimes, and a lot of them don't even get busted for those crimes. They get busted for like a broken taillight or something. That's why you gotta make sure to follow rule number 8. Don't get pulled over. This man went from Baptist minister to investment banker to drug dealer, which is actually a lot more common of a pipeline than you would think. But his second life would come to an end all because of a routine traffic stop. So let's start at the beginning. Aubrey Price was an upstanding citizen for most of his life. As a minister, he led multiple missions in South America to provide humanitarian aid and build churches in impoverished areas. But the thing about these missions is that they tend to be expensive and they're usually exclusively funded by donation. Now, when he wasn't ministering, Aubrey worked as a financial advisor for a bank. The guy wore a lot of hats. Not more than me though. Look at all these fucking hats. At some point, Aubrey decided to start his own investment firm called PFG with the goal of using the profits to fund his missions. At first, things with PFG were going pretty good. Aubrey had close to 100 investors, mostly people from his church, and everyone involved was getting their nut. But as they say, the road to hell is paved with speculation. Aubrey wasn't satisfied with pretty freaking good. He wanted more. So he started making riskier and more speculative investments, trying to get a bigger nut. When these investments didn't go his way, Aubrey falsified documents to make it seem that they were. And he figured that with a large enough cash injection, he could get all the money back and then some. So Aubrey convinced some of his wealthier clients to dump $10 million into a failing bank, which he planned to turn around. Now, this is basically the standard gambler's fallacy. Oh, bro, I just gotta do one more big bet and I'll get back everything I lost. I just gotta bet the rest of my money on black at the roulette table. Well, guess what? 00 came up and now I lost my condo. Anyways, the bank venture didn't quite pan out, and 2 years later, it was on the brink of collapsing. This is when ALP really started to panic. The ship was sinking and he was desperately trying everything to keep it afloat. Aubrey started living out of his office, making hundreds of phone calls per day, trying to scrounge up more investors to cover his losses. At one point, he just started siphoning money from the bank to the tune of $70 million. Eventually, the stress of trying to hold up this house of cards became too much, and Aubrey decided it was easier to just end it all. He wrote suicide letters to all his investors, admitting to the fraud, and he claimed that he would off himself by throwing himself under a high-speed ferry after it left Key West, Florida. He was seen boarding the ferry, and he was seen climbing over the railing, but never getting off somehow. Obviously, he didn't actually jump. It kind of makes you wonder, though, maybe he intended to, but backed out at the last second. I don't know. Now, Aubrey's family was convinced that he did pass away, and they asked the judge to declare him dead. But the FBI wasn't so convinced, and they continued the investigation, even offering a $20,000 bounty for any information, which didn't help because this man disappeared like my dad when I was 8. The FBI started to think the mother sucker was really dead. But then, on December 31st, 2013, 18 months after he went missing, the schlemiel got pulled over for speeding. Oof. You hate to see it. Now this begs the question, what was our boy up to during the year and a half that he was missing? Well, actually that's the most insane part of the story, and the only information we have is from Aubrey himself, so take it with a pinch of salt, like a hefty pinch. After ALP got off the ferry, he made his way to Central America, where he met up with an old friend, Pedro. Pedro was a businessman who sold everything from cell phones to farming equipment, but Aubrey would come to find out that it was just a front. What he really sold was cocaina, and Pedro offered Aubrey a job as a money launderer, and heavily implied that he would whack his whole family if he refused. Not only that, but he was also a cocaine taster, apparently. I was an expert taster of cocaine, understanding the quality. I had to taste it to know if it was good or not. Quality control. Now, for most people, this would be a dream job, but I guess things didn't work out too well because Aubrey made his way back to the United States, where he started working on Plan B. Living out of a cheap motel in Florida and growing weed. According to the FBI, Aubrey had a farm with 225 marijuana plants in it. But this little foray as a Florida pot kingpin would come to a screeching halt when he got pulled over on the way to Georgia. A cop noticed that he had a fake ID, and from there the police raided his motel room and found so much illegal stuff. Fake IDs, drugs, bootleg Nintendo games, anything you could think of. At his trial, Aubrey tried to appeal to the jury, saying that he felt desperate and that he had no options. He wanted to make some money for his children, and this was the only way he could think of. But the jury didn't buy his Breaking Bad bullshit. 30 years in prison. You'd be surprised at how many fugitives get caught after they get pulled over for something random. So that's why you should probably avoid cars altogether. Also, you should definitely avoid getting your picture taken. Which brings me to rule number 9. No photos. Listen, if you're able to fake your own death, you need to avoid cameras like you're a vampire, okay? You need to avoid cameras like a white woman who recently gained some weight. If you even see a camera, you need to destroy it just to be safe. Because one photograph can completely ruin everything. John Darwin was last seen alive in 2002. 5 years later, he showed up to a police station in London and told an officer, quote, "I think I'm a missing person," and claimed to have lost all his memories from the past 5 years. Pretty obvious that bro was completely full of baloney, but the police couldn't prove anything at first. That is, till they got a smoking gun, and it came in the form of a photograph. We'll get to that in 1 second. John and his wife Anne were your average working class British couple, but you see, John was never content with just being average, so he left his job as a school teacher and started getting into the real estate game. In just 4 short years, John and Anne owned over a dozen properties, but there was one problem. John bought too much too fast, and the properties weren't bringing in enough to cover the debt he used to buy them. It got to the point where the couple was in so much debt that they were on the verge of losing everything. This is when John realized that he was worth more dead than alive. So he took out a fat insurance policy, got in his canoe, and pedaled out to the North Sea. The next day, a massive search and rescue operation lasting weeks launched, scouring the North Sea for any trace of John. The only thing that turned up was his canoe, which had washed up miles away, and one of his sneakers. Meanwhile, the motherfucker was in his own house the whole time. He had also grown out his beard and started wearing sunglasses, and literally no one recognized him. Like, this guy was walking around his own town, passing by people he had known for his whole life, and no one recognized him. After the heat died down a bit, John was able to steal someone's identity and get himself a passport, which he used to move to Panama. The insurance money Anne received was more than enough to cover the debt, so the two of them were able to afford a nice little life for themselves in Panama. Oh, I forgot one thing. They had 2 sons, and Anne didn't tell them that their father was still alive, which, that's going to take a lot of therapy. After 5 years of living as a dead man, for some reason John decided to return to England. Let me repeat this. He left the beautiful tropical paradise in Panama to go back to England. Clearly, bro was mentally ill. The explanation he gave authorities was that he had no memories from the past 5 years.
The last thing I remember before any of this is You know what? I'm not going to do the British accent. The last thing I remember before any of this is a holiday in Norway in the year 2000. I have hazy recollections of being in a kayak, but I cannot remember the accident or anything leading up to it at all. It is therefore true to say that I do have some form of amnesia.
Not really sure what he was trying to do with that one, I gotta be honest. The insane thing is, this plan almost worked because at the end of the day, the police couldn't prove he didn't have amnesia because John did a really good job of covering his tracks, but not good enough. One of John's neighbors heard about the news and decided to Google the words John and Panama. Now, keep in mind, this was back when Google wasn't a piece of absolute dog shit, so she actually found something relevant. She found a website called Move to Panama, which promised to, quote, help you find a home, clear customs, and move to Panama without a hitch. Well, unfortunately for John and Anne, there was a hitch. Because on that website was a photo of both of them, and it was dated July 4th, 2006, a year before John's alleged amnesiac ass turned up in England. So, this photo was everything the authorities needed to throw John and Anne in prison. They both were sentenced to about 6 years apiece, but hey, at least John wasn't Mr. Average anymore. Now, we've reached our last rule, and this is a very important one. Probably, I'd say, top 10 in terms of importance. Rule number 10, don't push your luck. Nazario Moreno Gonzalez was one of the biggest drug lords in Mexico who headed the Knights Templar, a cartel based out of Michoacan, and incorporated a lot of Catholic rituals and imagery. Gonzalez grew up in a family of 13 children with a very religious and very violent mother, which was fitting because his entire life would be defined by both religion and violence. That's some Freudian bullshit if I ever heard it. Now, Nazario's foray into the drug business actually started in the US. At 16, he worked on a ranch near San Jose, California. It was there where he got involved with drugs because a lot of the farmers grew and sold weed on the side. So once he had some money, Nazario returned to Mexico and set up his own weed farm and trafficked it into the US himself. And business was good. Our boy became so successful with his route that he ended up becoming the right-hand man to Michoacan's drug kingpin, Carlos Rosales. Now, even though Nazario's business was booming, his personal life wasn't doing too well. You see, the guy really liked the booze, and it was starting to become a problem. He was constantly drunk, getting into fights, and waking up naked next to dudes, so he decided enough was enough and joined Alcoholics Anonymous. It was there that he rediscovered his interest in Christianity. He replaced his addiction to booze with an obsession with religion, which would greatly impact him later in life. In 2004, Nazario's boss, along with several other big-time drug lords, were thrown in prison, and somebody had to fill the vacuum. So our boy stepped up. Now, it should be mentioned that by this point, Nazario started to develop a bit of a messianic complex. As he rose through the Mexican underworld, this delusion would only grow stronger. By 2006, Gonzalez fully controlled the state of Michoacan and was one of the most powerful people in all of Mexico. And let me tell you, this dude was absolutely brutal. He would punish so-called criminals by flogging, decapitating, and even crucifying them. At the same time, he was funding the construction of churches and drug rehabs across Michoacan, which, I don't know, I guess it balanced out. Kind of. Not really. He also distributed religious sermons among his followers written by him. This man genuinely believed that he was leading some sort of holy crusade, and his foot soldiers started believing it too. So not only was the dude running one of the biggest drug cartels in the world, but it also doubled as a cult. As you can imagine, the Mexican government wasn't too keen on having this quasi-prophet/drug kingpin running amok. When the 2006 elections rolled around, Mexico's new president basically made Gonzalez public enemy numero uno. That means number one. But it would be 4 more years until they were able to actually do something about it. In 2010, a massive gunfight broke out between 2,000 Mexican federales and 500 cartel members. A lot of the people involved were taken off the census that day, including Nazario Gonzalez.
Drug cartel boss Nazario Moreno Gonzalez, alias El Chayo, was killed in a shootout with the Mexican army on Thursday. Mexican authorities trumpeted the incident as a significant victory in the country's fight against organized crime.
In reality, he was alive and well and just went into hiding. Nazario played along and allowed the government to take a victory lap. Meanwhile, the people of Michoacan started venerating him as a saint and erected a massive grave in his honor. Now, Gonzalez should have just used this opportunity to lay low and start a new life. He should have just changed his gender and moved to Europe like the Academy Award-winning film Emilia Perez.
From penis to vagina.
But instead, Gonzalez decided to push his luck. He continued to run his cartel from behind the scenes, but this time with a cool new rebrand. He changed the name from La Familia Michoacan to the Knights Templar. You see, Nazario saw his fake death as a sign from God. The guy already thought he was some kind of prophet, and this only solidified his view. The rebrand was like an outward manifestation of that. So his soldiers were now known as Templars, and they started wearing patches inspired by the Crusaders. It was ironic. By trying to whack Nazario, Mexican authorities made him more powerful than ever. And best believe, he abused that power. This man basically became the dictator of Michoacan. Every single dollar that was made in the state had to pass through Templar hands first. Now, the gang was already known for extortion prior to this, but now it was off the charts. The Templars charged people for the right to hold private parties. They taxed people for buying new cars or plasma TVs. They even charged them for the number of square meters in their homes. Oh, and it goes without saying, people were getting whacked left and right. If you even slightly stepped out of line, you were liable to get turned into carne asada. It was too much. Public perception of Nazario had completely flipped. He went from saint to Satan. Eventually, the people got so fed up that a group of vigilantes rose up to fight back. And it wasn't just the civilians. The Templars were getting sick of his antics as well. It was becoming clear to everyone that Nazario Gonzalez had to go. So his own bodyguards whacked him and handed his body over to the military, who of course took credit for the kill. On his second death, Nazario's grave was more likely to be met with piss rather than roses. Now guys, I would love to tell you the story about how my uncle Rueben faked his death and ended up becoming the mayor of a small town in Moldova, but for legal reasons, I don't think I can talk about it right now, maybe in a future video, so I'll end the video with this.